Karen Mitchell thought she was about to humiliate Judge Judy on national television. The 45-year-old real estate agent from Westchester sat in the plaintiff's chair, her perfectly styled blonde bob quivering with barely contained rage as she clutched a folder she believed contained her ticket to victory. What Karen didn't know was that in exactly 18 minutes, she would be physically carried out of the courtroom by 2 police officers while screaming about her constitutional rights. But here's the part that will blow your mind. Karen actually called 911 on Judge Judy during the trial, demanding that America's toughest TV judge be arrested for doing her job. The footage of what happened next became the most viral courtroom moment in television history, ending Karen's career and creating a meme that's still being shared 5 years later. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Karen had walked into that Los Angeles studio with the supreme confidence of someone who had never truly faced consequences for her entitled behavior. Dressed in her signature power suit, carrying her designer purse like a weapon, she had spent the entire morning telling anyone who would listen that Judge Judy was about to meet her match. She has no idea who she's dealing with, Karen had bragged to the other plaintiffs in the waiting area. I am a licensed professional. I know the law better than some TV judge who's just there for entertainment. The other plaintiffs had exchanged uncomfortable glances, but Karen was too wrapped up in her own narrative to notice. She had come prepared with what she thought was an airtight case, armed with documents she was certain would prove Judge Judy wrong and force an apology on live television. The case itself seemed straightforward enough. Karen was suing her neighbor Maria Santos for $2,500 over a fence dispute, but this wasn't just about property lines. This was about Karen's fundamental belief that her status as a successful real estate agent gave her the right to override anyone she considered beneath her social class. The fence she had built was 6 inches onto Maria's property, and when the quiet housekeeper had politely asked her to move it, Karen had not only refused but had actually demanded that Maria pay her for the improvements to the property line. When Maria had threatened to remove the fence herself, Karen had filed the lawsuit claiming emotional distress and property damage. In Karen's mind, this was an open and shut case of putting an uppity immigrant back in her place. What made Karen's confidence so tragically misplaced was that she had fundamentally misunderstood both her opponent and the arena she was entering. Judge Judy Shandlin wasn't some pushover local magistrate who could be intimidated by loud voices and threats of lawsuits. At 79 years old, the former family court judge had built a television empire by demolishing entitled people exactly like Karen. Her Brooklyn-bred, no-nonsense approach had made her the highest-paid person on television, precisely because she refused to coddle people who thought their money or status put them above basic human decency. Judge Judy had been cutting through entitled nonsense for over 2 decades, and she had developed a particular talent for identifying Karens within the first 30 seconds of meeting them. As Karen sat in that plaintiff's chair, adjusting her jacket and practicing her opening statement under her breath, she had no idea that the production staff was already placing bets on how quickly Judge Judy would destroy her. The camera operators had seen enough entitled plaintiffs to recognize the warning signs. The way Karen had demanded a different chair because the original was uncomfortable, her insistence on having her water served in glass instead of plastic, and her actual attempt to negotiate better camera angles for her good side. But most telling of all was the folder Karen kept clutching like a security blanket, filled with documents she was convinced would prove her intellectual superiority over everyone in the room. She had no clue that those same documents would become the instruments of her complete and utter humiliation. The irony of Karen's situation was breathtaking in its completeness. She had come to Judge Judy's court believing she was the smartest person in the room, armed with what she thought was devastating evidence against a simple housekeeper. Instead, she was about to face a legal mind that had been honed by decades of actual courtroom experience, backed by the full authority of a television production that had no patience for racist, entitled behavior. Karen's folder, which she thought contained her path to victory, actually contained a survey that clearly showed her fence was illegally placed on her neighbor's property. But Karen had either never actually read the document carefully, or had convinced herself that her professional opinion could override official measurements. Before we dive into the most epic courtroom meltdown in television history, hit that like button and subscribe for the most shocking Judge Judy moments you've never seen. Comment below where you're watching from and if you've ever dealt with a Karen this delusional. Trust me, what happens next will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about entitled behavior and its consequences. Karen Mitchell wasn't just any entitled suburban mom, she was the final boss of Karens, a woman who had spent 15 years perfecting the art of using her professional credentials as a weapon against anyone she deemed inferior. Her real estate career had given her just enough knowledge to be dangerous, and just enough success to believe she was untouchable. With her $800,000 Westchester home, her white BMW with the custom license plate Realtor 1, and her signature blonde bob that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," Karen had built her entire identity around being right, being important, and being feared by service workers across 3 zip codes. Her Yelp reviews read like a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare, and her Nextdoor posts were legendary for their ability to turn minor neighborhood disputes into full-scale community drama. What made Karen particularly dangerous was her complete inability to recognize when she was wrong, combined with an arsenal of phrases designed to escalate any situation into a crisis that required managerial intervention. She had never met a customer service situation she couldn't turn into a discrimination lawsuit, never encountered a store policy she couldn't claim violated her constitutional rights, and never faced a person of color in a service position without somehow making it about her superior understanding of how things work in America. Her social media was a museum of entitlement, filled with photos of herself at charity galas where she donated just enough to buy social status, complaints about her housekeeper, not organizing her closet properly, and long rants about how hard it was to find good help who understood quality standards. The woman sitting across the courtroom from Karen couldn't have been more different. Maria Santos, 52, had immigrated from El Salvador 20 years earlier with nothing but determination and a work ethic that put most Americans to shame. She worked 3 jobs, cleaning houses during the day, stocking shelves at a grocery store in the evenings, and babysitting on weekends, all to support her 2 teenage daughters and send money back to her elderly parents. Maria had saved for 8 years to buy her modest 2-bedroom house, a tiny piece of the American dream that she treated like a palace because she understood its true value. She spoke softly, worked hard, and minded her own business, which made her the perfect target for someone like Karen who mistook kindness for weakness and quiet dignity for ignorance. The property dispute that had brought them to Judge Judy's courtroom was a masterpiece of Karen logic. When Maria had bought her house, the property survey clearly showed where her land ended and Karen's began. But Karen, in her infinite wisdom as a real estate professional, had decided that the survey was obviously wrong, because her mental calculations based on years of experience told her the property line should be 6 inches further into Maria's yard. Without asking permission or even informing her neighbor, Karen had hired a fence company to install a 6-foot privacy fence that deliberately encroached onto Maria's property. When the fence was completed, Karen had actually congratulated herself on her brilliant business sense, believing she had just increased her property value while solving a boundary problem that only existed in her head. Maria's response to discovering the fence had been exactly what any reasonable person would expect. She had politely knocked on Karen's door, explained that the fence was on her property according to the official survey, and asked if they could work together to resolve the issue. Maria had even offered to pay for half the fence relocation costs, despite Karen being entirely at fault. But Karen's reaction to this reasonable request had been pure, concentrated entitlement. She had looked Maria up and down, noted her accent and her cleaning service uniform, and delivered a response that perfectly encapsulated 15 years of unchecked privilege. "I don't think you understand how property values work. This fence is actually improving your land. You should be thanking me, not complaining." When Maria had calmly shown Karen the official survey proving the fence was on her property, Karen had done what Karens do best. She had escalated. "That survey is clearly wrong," she had declared, as if her real estate license gave her the authority to override professional surveyors. "I've been in this business for 15 years. I think I know more about property lines than some piece of paper." When Maria had suggested they could hire a new surveyor to verify the boundaries, Karen had laughed in her face. "I'm not spending money to prove what I already know. That fence stays where it is, and if you have a problem with that, you can take it up with my lawyer." But Maria Santos hadn't backed down. After weeks of Karen's condescending lectures about property law and thinly veiled suggestions that Maria was too uneducated to understand complex real estate matters, Maria had finally issued an ultimatum: move the fence within 30 days or she would have it removed herself. Karen's response had been swift and completely predictable. She had filed a lawsuit demanding $2,500 in damages for emotional distress, harassment, and threatened destruction of property improvements. In Karen's mind, she wasn't just suing for money. She was teaching an important lesson about respecting your betters and staying in your lane. The lawsuit itself read like a masterpiece of entitled delusion. Karen claimed that Maria's aggressive request to move the fence had caused her severe emotional trauma and professional embarrassment. She alleged that Maria's threats to remove the fence constituted property damage and harassment. Most incredibly, she demanded compensation for the improvements she had made to Maria's property without permission, arguing that Maria owed her money for the increased property value. The legal filing was so outrageous that Maria's court-appointed translator had actually asked if there had been some kind of mistake in the paperwork. What Karen didn't realize as she sat in Judge Judy's waiting room, practicing her opening statement and mentally spending her expected settlement money, was that she had chosen the worst possible opponent and the worst possible venue for her particular brand of entitled racism. Judge Judy Schindlin had built her career destroying people who thought their money, status, or skin color gave them the right to abuse others. And unlike the customer service managers and store employees Karen was used to bullying into submission, Judge Judy couldn't be fired, intimidated, or bought. The stage was set for a collision between unstoppable entitlement and immovable justice, and only one of them was going to walk away with their dignity intact. The moment Judge Judy walked into her courtroom, Karen's confidence began its first microscopic crack. At 79 years old, Judith Schindlin moved with the focused energy of a predator who had spent decades perfecting the art of psychological warfare. Her steel-gray hair was pulled back in its signature style, and her dark eyes immediately began scanning the room with the calculating precision of someone who could identify bullshit from across a football field. She had read Karen's case file that morning over her coffee, and the combination of obvious racism, stunning entitlement, and complete legal ignorance had actually made her laugh out loud. This was going to be fun. Ms. Mitchell, Judge Judy began, settling into her chair with the casual authority of someone who had destroyed 10,000 egos before lunch. You're suing your neighbor for $2,500 because she won't let you keep a fence on her property. Before I hear your explanation for this fascinating legal theory, let me ask you something. She leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on that deceptively calm tone that regular viewers knew meant someone was about to get eviscerated. In your 15 years as a real estate professional, have you ever encountered a situation where someone could legally force their neighbor to accept unauthorized improvements to their property? Karen, completely missing the trap being set, launched into what she clearly believed was a devastating opening argument. Your Honor, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of this dispute. As a licensed real estate professional with over 15 years of experience in property valuation and boundary assessment, I can say with complete confidence that my neighbor is confused about the actual property lines. She gestured dismissively toward Maria, who sat quietly with her hands folded. Mrs. Santos, who works as a domestic cleaner, doesn't have the technical expertise to interpret complex surveying documents. I was simply trying to correct an obvious error in the original survey that was clearly conducted by someone who didn't understand the topographical nuances of our neighborhood. The courtroom fell silent as Karen's words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Judge Judy's eyebrow arched in that way that had become an internet meme, and the audience shifted uncomfortably as they processed what they had just heard. Karen, oblivious to the horror she had just unleashed, continued digging her grave. Furthermore, Your Honor, I believe my professional assessment of property values should carry more weight than the uninformed opinions of someone who, frankly, probably doesn't fully understand American property law given her background. She said the last two words with the kind of emphasis that made everyone in the courtroom understand exactly what she meant. Judge Judy slowly removed her glasses and placed them on the bench in front of her. The gesture was deliberate, theatrical, and absolutely terrifying to anyone who understood its significance. Ms. Mitchell, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow managed to fill the entire room, are you suggesting that your neighbor's immigration status affects her ability to read a legal survey that clearly shows where her property ends and yours begins? The question was delivered with surgical precision, designed to force Karen into either admitting her racism or doubling down on it. Karen, true to form, chose the path of maximum destruction. Well, Your Honor, Karen said with the kind of smile that customer service workers have nightmares about, I'm simply saying that experience matters. I've been reading property surveys since Mrs. Santos was probably still learning English. The gasp from the audience was audible, but Karen was too intoxicated by her own perceived cleverness to notice. It's not about immigration status, it's about professional qualifications. I have a license. I have training. I understand property law in ways that someone who cleans houses for a living simply cannot comprehend. Judge Judy's face went through a transformation that the cameras captured in perfect high definition. Her expression shifted from professional skepticism to barely controlled fury in exactly 2.3 seconds, a moment that would later be dissected frame by frame in countless reaction videos. Ms. Mitchell, she said, standing up slowly from her chair in a move that made the entire courtroom hold its breath. Let me make sure I understand your position. You built a fence on someone else's property, and when they asked you to move it, you sued them. And your justification for this is that you think you're smarter than everyone else because you sell houses for a living? Karen, sensing that things weren't going according to her script, made the fatal decision to interrupt Judge Judy mid-sentence. Your Honor, with all due respect, I don't think you're understanding the complexity of this situation. This isn't just about a fence. This is about property values, neighborhood standards, and frankly, about people knowing their place in the community. The last sentence came out exactly as Karen intended, as a threat designed to put both Maria and Judge Judy back in line. Instead, it had the effect of a nuclear bomb going off in the courtroom. The silence that followed was so complete that the sound technicians later said they could hear Karen's heartbeat through her wireless microphone. Judge Judy walked around from behind her bench, something she had only done 3 times in 24 years of television, and positioned herself directly in front of Karen's chair. "Their place," she repeated, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow managed to sound like a roar. "Ms. Mitchell, in 25 years as a family court judge and 24 years on television, I have encountered some truly remarkable specimens of human garbage. But you, with your casual racism, your breathtaking arrogance, and your complete inability to understand basic property law, are setting new standards for stupidity." Karen's face went through several colors as she realized that Judge Judy wasn't just disagreeing with her, she was declaring war. But instead of retreating, Karen doubled down with the desperation of someone whose entire worldview was collapsing in real time. "I don't have to sit here and be insulted by someone who clearly doesn't understand modern real estate practices," she shouted, standing up and pointing her finger at Judge Judy. "This is harassment and I have rights." What happened next will go down as the single most insane moment in courtroom television history. Karen Mitchell, a 45-year-old real estate agent, actually pulled out her iPhone and dialed 911 while standing in Judge Judy's courtroom. "Yes, I need police immediately," she announced loudly enough for her voice to echo through the studio. "I'm being held against my will and verbally assaulted by a hostile judge who is violating my constitutional rights." The entire courtroom sat in stunned silence as Karen continued her emergency call, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "She's creating a hostile environment and I fear for my safety." Judge Judy simply sat back down and watched the show with the fascinated expression of someone observing a rare species of stupidity in its natural habitat. The bailiff, Petrie Hawkins Bird, positioned himself strategically but made no move to intervene. This was too good to interrupt. The audience members were frantically trying to record with their phones despite the no recording policy, because they knew they were witnessing something that would break the internet. 12 minutes later, 2 LAPD officers walked into the most surreal scene of their careers. They found Karen standing in the middle of a television courtroom, still clutching her phone, demanding justice from America's most famous TV judge, while a studio audience watched in horrified fascination. "Officers, thank God you're here." Karen rushed toward them like they were her salvation. "This judge is abusing her authority and holding me prisoner. I've been verbally attacked and I demand she be arrested for harassment." The officers, clearly trying to process what they were seeing, looked around the courtroom with growing understanding. One officer asked the obvious question, "Ma'am, are you free to leave?" Karen's face went through a series of expressions as she realized the fatal flaw in her plan. "That's not the point," she shrieked. "She can't just dismiss my case because she doesn't like me. This is America." Judge Judy finally spoke up, her voice calm and professional. "Officers, Ms. Mitchell lost her case based on evidence she provided herself. No one is preventing her from leaving, but she seems to believe that losing constitutes false imprisonment." The officers exchanged a look that perfectly communicated their growing realization that they had been called to arrest Judge Judy by someone having a complete mental breakdown. Can you believe what you're seeing? This gets even more unbelievable. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss these incredible courtroom moments. Share this with someone who needs to see what happens when Karens meet their match. When the officers explained that Judge Judy had the legal authority to rule on her case and no crime had been committed, Karen's last thread of sanity snapped completely. "You're all corrupt," she screamed, throwing herself onto the courtroom floor in a full toddler-style tantrum. "I'm not leaving until I get justice." The 2 officers looked at each other, sighed deeply, and made the decision that would create the most viral courtroom clip in internet history. What followed was pure comedic gold. 2 professional LAPD officers had to physically lift a grown woman off the floor while she kicked and screamed about her constitutional rights. Karen clutched her designer purse like a life preserver as they carried her toward the exit, her voice echoing through the studio. "This isn't over. I'm suing everyone. I know the mayor." The cameras captured every second of her humiliating escort, from her flailing arms to her threats to sue the entire justice system. Once Karen was removed, Judge Judy turned to Maria with a smile. Mrs. Santos, not only do you owe nothing, but I'm awarding you $500 for having to deal with this nonsense. The audience erupted in thunderous applause as Maria quietly wiped away tears of relief. Outside in the hallway, Karen's voice could still be heard demanding badge numbers and threatening lawsuits, completely oblivious to the fact that her entire meltdown had been recorded for posterity and was about to make her the most famous Karen in American history. Within 24 hours, Karen Mitchell became the most famous Karen on the planet. The hashtag #JudgeJudyKaren exploded across every social media platform, with the clip of her being carried out by police accumulating 50 million views in the first week. Her real estate career evaporated overnight as clients fled in horror, and her brokerage quietly terminated her contract to avoid the publicity nightmare. Karen attempted multiple appeals and threatened countless lawsuits, all of which were dismissed faster than her dignity. Maria Santos, meanwhile, used her $500 award to throw a block party for her neighbors, celebrating not just her victory, but the moment an entire community watched justice triumph over entitlement. The fence was moved at Karen's expense, and Maria's property value actually increased due to her internet fame as the woman who stood up to the ultimate Karen. 5 years later, Karen's meltdown remains the gold standard for entitled behavior consequences. Law enforcement agencies use the clip in training videos about dealing with delusional complainants. And "Don't be a Judge Judy Karen" became shorthand for checking your privilege before it destroys your life. This incredible courtroom meltdown shows what happens when entitlement meets reality. Don't miss our next breakdown of the most shocking courtroom moments ever caught on camera. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss these unbelievable real-life dramas. Drop a comment below. Have you ever witnessed a Karen meltdown this epic? What would you have done in Judge Judy's position? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video where we break down another Karen getting exactly what she deserved.